Welcome, welcome. My name is La, and I'll be your Zoom host for today, which is a one-day summit healing trauma with EMDR and applied neuroscience. And this session in particular is called The Window of Transformation, Interpersonal Neurobiology and Conflict Healing with the amazing Kai Cheng Thom. And we also like to acknowledge that the land that we live and work on is the traditional territory of many indigenous peoples, and we respectfully honor their cultures, traditions. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our amazing presenter for right now, which is Kai Cheng Thom, who is a certified somatic sex educator, qualified mediator, clinical hypnotherapist, and certified professional coach based in Toronto. She's also the author of 5 award-winning books in various genres. Kai's work focuses on the intersection of social justice, pleasure activism, and transformative approaches to healing conflict. A noted speaker and practitioner of somatic wellness, healing, and group process facilitation. Kai supports individuals and groups who are seeking to repair relationships and make transformative change. She also teaches as adjunct faculty at the Institute for the Study of Somatic Sex Education. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to you, Kai.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting us so beautifully, Jamila. And thanks to Denise also for holding the space. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this beautiful summit on trauma healing through applied neuroscience. Welcome, welcome. So, as you heard, my name is Kai Cheng. That's all my first name. Tom is my last name. Sometimes people get confused. It's a three-part name. It's one of those confusing ones. Um, and I have a few different capacities that I teach here at the Embody Lab in, but mostly coming from a background of clinical social work and professional mediatorship today. We'll get into all of that in a moment. But first, I wanted to acknowledge that I am calling in from Treaty 13 territory, Toronto in so-called Canada, also called Dugarondo, which is part of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, an ancient agreement between the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Anishinaabe peoples that the land colonially known as the Great Lakes region is meant to be stewarded in the spirit of collaboration and nonviolence for future generations to come. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse Indigenous peoples, as well as settlers. I myself am not Indigenous to North America, also called Turtle Island, but rather am a settler of Chinese descent. Um, to me, the practice of land acknowledgement is not only an important, small step towards the work of decolonization and solidarity here on these lands towards liberation and justice for all, it is also a way of shaping our perspective on whatever we're about to talk about. Which is to say, in this case, trauma healing, and in this specific session, conflict transformation. We can see colonization and the legacy of colonization as a form of oppressive conflict based on the exploitation of Indigenous peoples historically. So, what we're about to go into is a lot of nervous system science, some brain science, conflict resolution strategy, and all of that I invite us to place within the context of knowing that. Dominant culture, mainstream society, the nation states of Canada and the United States are in a conflict, in a struggle with many Indigenous nations to North America or Turtle Island. And conflict transformation in this context might be about seeking ways to find repair, reconciliation, and a deeper justice than the one we have now. Does that make sense? I hope so. If it doesn't, that's okay. We can reflect on it together. Hmm. So, um, let's see. I am a mediator in the context of mostly social change work. So some of you may know this and it may be new to others, but the context of working towards social transformation is full of conflict. I see it all the time. Um, I used to be a social worker in clinical mental health practice and also in advocacy work. And I switched into being a professional mediator because almost all of the communities that I know were locked in multiple forms of conflict. And the link that became really clear to me as a clinical social worker was that this conflict was, for the most part, rooted in various forms of trauma. That is to say, we conflict is a natural part of human existence and human relationships, but conflict becomes intractable, entrenched, and terrifying because of the various forms of trauma that many of us have experienced. I'm curious, just by show of hands or emoji, how many of you have ever got the sense that the conflicts around you were being driven by something more than the surface level situations that triggered them? Yeah, okay. So there's a sense of familiarity with this concept in the room. Yeah, that is essentially my specialization, my focus as a mediator, and what we're going to talk about today from the lens of interpersonal neurobiology. But before we go into more theory or more talking, I'd like to invite us into a little practice. So, when we do experientials as a part of embodiment or somatic learning, the most important principle to me is that choosing is more important than doing, which is a phrase and a principle that comes to me from my elder and teacher, Kathin Jesse, who is an innovator in the realm of somatic sex education. Essentially, what choosing is more important than doing means is that the practice of leaning into empowered choice and saying yes, no, maybe, or I changed my mind, or some combination thereof, in almost any given context, is itself a healing thing to do. Sometimes, in a therapeutic context or a healing context, there can be a sense of, oh, I have to force myself to do an experiential practice. If I don't do the experiential practice, then I'm not getting the learning. Um, and while I really encourage and delight in enthusiasm. What I would say to that is it's not about getting ourselves through any particular activity. It is about the experience of getting to choose to be in an activity, to not do an activity, or to try one out and then stop midway through if it's not working for us. That really is the building block, the foundational principle, and also for most of us, a new learning experience in the nervous system, that is the most important one. And I preface my experiential with this because as a conflict worker, most of my experientials are in some way going to be a little stressful because conflict itself is a reflexive stress on the body. With that said, I'm going to invite you to think about conflict. It doesn't have to be the worst conflict you've ever been in your life. And in fact, I would really encourage you not to think about the worst conflict you've ever been in your life. Sometimes I like to say maybe a conflict you've had with a pet, or maybe a small child, a petty conflict you had with a family member when you were little that was not emotionally scarring. Maybe a conflict you had at school, a conflict that makes you laugh when you think about it nowadays. But think about a conflict. Let your body drop into that memory, oh, so gently, and notice what comes up. I'm going to open the chat now for a moment and invite you to share what sensations arise in your body when you think about conflict. There are no wrong answers to this question. Heat in stomach, fear, tightness, tightening in the tummy, anger, disappointment, anxiety, discomfort, butterflies in stomach, stopped breathing, my heart beats faster, tightness in chest, tight shoulders, hardening, tingling, Here we go again. Short breath, heat, pressure, tingling in arms. Dissociation. Uh-huh. Okay. And more coming in. Yeah. Thanks for this. I'm going to invite us to take what I like to call a sacred pause now. So it's hands over heart. A long breath in and a longer breath out. And in the sacred pause, we let our attention travel inward to notice how we are. And in this sacred pause, I invite you to be curious about the sensations that arose. What are they telling you about what you need? What is heat or tightness or tingling, shortened breath or racing thought? What are tight shoulders, heat in stomach, fast beating heart? What are all of those sensations telling us about what we need? Maybe now gently transitioning to a bit of gentle movement. Whatever movement feels right for your body, but I like to invite this kind of side to side slither, maybe a very gentle twist from side to side if your spine likes that. Mm, a stretch up toward the sky, a stretch down toward the ground. Mm, that's good for my spine. A stretch out to the sides, or as I like to say, into the web of connection. Maybe wrapping your arms around yourself for a self hold or self hug. You like, you could do a little bilateral stimulation here. This is sometimes called a butterfly hug. And the invitation is to let your body know whatever sensations come up around conflict, those sensations are probably trying to help, working hard to save your life or save something. And so we might just offer some gratitude to the innate intelligence of our bodies. Like, thank you. Thank you for taking care of whatever you're taking care of. You might give yourself a little extra squeeze, extra loving squeeze. And on a long, gentle exhale, slow release. You might glance around the room or space that you are in and notice any physical aspect of this space that you like. Maybe a color, like I'm looking at the blue of the sky outside of my window right now. Maybe a texture, maybe an object that you really love. Pausing to take that external resource in, letting your body notice where it is. And then when you're ready, gently orienting back to the screen, noticing some faces. Now, most of you have your cameras off, but some of you have them on. And for this, I like to have my camera on and wave hello at somebody in particular. You don't have to tell them who they are. You know, like to smile with like genuineness, not a forced smile. If you don't have a smile in you, I just have a lot of smiles in me usually. But when I was when I was growing up, I used to read to my little sister this series of books called Scaredy Squirrel. Does anyone know about Scaredy Squirrel? And Scaredy Squirrel, the character often does this smile, like which is not really like a comforting smile usually. But we're going for the smile that comes from within, you know. Hmm. Noticing faces, sending welcome. Yeah. Hello. Hello, welcome. Hmm. And I'm going to open the chat again to everyone and invite you to share. What are you noticing in your body now? What are you noticing in your body now? Connection. Hmm. Relaxed. Warm. Settled. Grateful. Calm. Relaxed. More relaxed. Opening. More relaxed. Even sparks of joy. Space and comfort. Less tension. Safer. Peaceful. Gratitude. Heart is not pounding. Caught a smile, which is really nice. Yeah. Hmm. Lesser tension, grounding, total relaxation, less tension. Yeah. hmm So sometimes something happens when we take a moment to slow down, tend to our bodies, and tend to one another. When we intentionally, through um, cultivated embodied presence in ourselves and cultivating what my teacher Catherine might call a neurochemical interpersonal environment of trust or trustworthiness, something shifts. Yeah. It's interesting to notice that we only really did that thinking about conflict exercise for about 10 seconds. Some of you may not have even thought about specific conflicts, but for many of you, maybe most of you, all of you, something happened immediately. Immediate sensations of discomfort, getting ready, perhaps feeling danger or fear. Yeah. Did anyone notice how fast that happened? Yeah. It's really quick. And we're not even like really having a specific conflict in this room. I don't think anybody said anything too controversial yet, but it happens immediately. That felt sense in the collective body. Some of you may have been perfectly calm and cool as a cucumber, which is great. You must teach me your ways. But in the collective body, something happens immediately. And really interesting to notice how something can happen pretty swiftly as well around coming back into what I like to call the window of transformation, which is that felt sense of, oh, okay, maybe we're okay. We got this. But you will also notice we spent a longer time doing that than it took for the body to become what we might call dysregulated or distressed. Yeah. It's just important to notice something happens in the body immediately around conflict, at least the collective body, but probably the individual one as well. And the neurochemical environment between us can be altered at will with willing participation from all or most of the people in the group. Really, really fascinating to me. I'm endlessly interested in this kind of thing. Anyone else? Just me? It's okay. It's my presentation. I joke, I joke. Okay, so I'm going to show you some slides. So we only have a little bit of time together today, but I intend to treasure every minute of it. We have three learning objectives. The first is to discuss the relevance of interpersonal neurobiology to conflict management, healing, and transformation. The second is to apply simple nervous system-based frameworks to situations of interpersonal conflict for deepened understanding. So, deepened understanding of what is going on in the body, the nervous system, the brain, when conflict is occurring, when we're noticing conflict. I might also venture to say that conflict is always happening to some extent, certainly in the world. But even in smaller systems, conflict is almost always happening. But when we notice it is when the body starts to react. And our third learning objective is to use somatic interventions to support ourselves and others to resolve conflicts in day-to-day life. And we actually just did that in a small way, is we practiced using internal resourcing, external resourcing, and interpersonal resourcing to support our bodies through the experience of conflict-based sensations. We'll be doing a little more of that as well. Okay, so let's talk about interpersonal neurobiology and conflict transformation. Is anyone here already familiar with the framework of interpersonal neurobiology? Little show of hands. Some of you, quite a few. Great, fabulous. Yes. Well, I love interpersonal neurobiology. It is a framework first developed and coined by Dr. Dan Siegel, who drew from the fields of neuroscience, psychiatry, systems theory, and more to create a practically applicable way of using brain science to support understanding and intervening in the way that social relationships and brain development affect each other. So Dr. Dan Siegel, I believe, is actually a friend of Dr. Scott Lyons, who is the director of the Embody Lab. And Dr. Siegel has actually taught for us in a few of our programs. And it's always just really exciting for me because I'm like, wow, a celebrity, you know? Um, the framework of interpersonal neurobiology started to be developed by Dr. Siegel in the 90s, and since then, quite a few other innovators, practitioners, and scientists in various fields have contributed to it. I really recommend looking into Dr. Siegel's books to learn more about the development of this field. He's a wonderfully accessible writer, and something I really love about this framework is that it really always is practically applicable. So it's not only theory or science. There's almost always a focus on how we can use it in our day-to-day lives. Before we go on, for those who are not familiar, I will show you a very quick tool that comes to us from the field of interpersonal neurobiology. Many of you know it already, I bet. It is the hand model of the brain. Who is familiar with the hand model of the brain? Yes. Okay, a lot of you are doing your hand model already. Good. Well, for those who are not familiar, I will show you very quickly. The hand model of the brain was developed by Dr. Siegel through the framework of interpersonal neurobiology, and I believe it was first used in the field of child psychiatry. I certainly learned it first in the field of child psychiatry when I was working in hospitals as a family therapist. So the hand model of the brain goes like this. We are trying to conceptualize the brain, and we're using our hand as the model for it. So the brain is composed of many parts. If you look at what I'm doing, I'm kind of making the shape of a brain with my hand. You know, it's sort of this round, ovular sort of object. And I'm opening up the brain to show you a few different parts of the brain. So here we find the lower limbic system of the brain. Yes. So like the brain stem, the hindbrain, these back parts of the brain are where we keep our instinctive survival reflexes as well as certain forms of memory. Yes? So this part of the brain is the part of the brain that sometimes we also call the reptilian brain, although we don't need to call it that. It's the part of that brain that holds our reflexive responses to danger, fear, pain, stressful situations. Does that make sense? This is the part of the brain that gets activated when we are having a conflict, or in the case of children, having conflict or having a tantrum, being distressed, expressing a need, and so on. This part of the brain, the forward part of the brain, the part in front, the part on top, this big kind of lobe here in the front is the prefrontal cortex, more or less. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for, some of you will already know, executive functioning. What is executive functioning? Big debate, but more or less, executive functioning is about advanced planning, about logical reasoning. The prefrontal cortex and executive functioning is also about impulse control, which is key, right? And we know that for children who have developing brains, impulse control is not super present. It is there as they are getting older and older, but it's not fully developed. There's some research that says that impulse control doesn't fully develop until about the age of 25 or 26 in a human. And I would say, I don't know. I mean, I feel like maybe impulse control is a sort of a shifting sands situation across the lifespan, because I don't know about you, but I've noticed that some dear people in my life who had a lot of executive functioning and control over emotions started to not do that as they got older as well. Or maybe there was a particular moment in their life and that changed. And so all of this is to say the prefrontal cortex develops and grows as we get older. It also changes as we get older. And it is responsible for a lot of things. It helps us to control and manage what happens in the brain stem and the lower regions of the brain when we are activated, when our danger sense is activated. And it is not so developed in children, maybe the rest of us, when we have experienced trauma, developmental trauma, shock trauma, severe trauma, intergenerational trauma, war trauma, so many types of trauma in the world also. The prefrontal cortex is affected. The development of our ability to do executive functioning is affected, and we'll talk about that more later, because actually that is neurobiologically, it is adaptive to situations of danger. We need the lower limbic system to take care of us with its instinctive responses when we are living through traumatic situations. And that can have a lasting impact on the way we experience life. So in this hand model of the brain, Dr. Dan Siegel would say, when we are triggered, when we are experiencing danger, sometimes, especially if our prefrontal cortex has developed in the context of trauma or is not fully developed, we will flip our lid, meaning that the prefrontal cortex goes offline, our ability to do executive functioning goes offline, and we are responding from the reptilian or hind part of the brain to the social situation in front of us, rather than from the prefrontal cortex. Does this make sense? And so this, for me, was a revelation when I learned it for working with children, working in child psychiatry, where children actually were developing in neurochemical environments of threat, mistrust, unsafety, trauma, right? And we teach children this model of the brain, also their parents, this model of the brain. Very often, when we're using the hand model of the brain in family therapy or child psychotherapy, we invite this curiosity about what helps us to bring the lid back on, right? And I just want to, show you that and maybe invite curiosity around it as well. Yes, that's what I'll say. We flip the lid, we want to bring the lid back on. And get really curious about what happens if we're moving through conflict with our lid flipped. Very simple model of the brain. Really, really useful. I got really curious about it because, again, I learned it in the context of working with children, but then I became a mediator and I was like, oh, a lot of adults act in ways that are very young looking when they are in conflict, like me. Anyone else notice that you're acting in a way that you look back and you're like, oh, that's very young of me? Yeah. Yeah, so that I was like, right. So actually, this model is really applicable to us, and there's something a little bit haunting around it for me. There's always something haunting around psychodynamics for me, which is just to say, my child self that did grow up actually in a situation of pretty intense danger, a neurochemical environment of danger and mistrust, that child self reemerges when I am in situations of conflict, serious conflict sometimes. But also, I don't know. My husband recently bought a TV without asking me, and I lost my marbles, for a moment. And I was like, what's this about? My friend was joking, well, how funny that Kai Cheng Thom, expert mediator, got so upset about a new TV, which is true. It's actually quite funny. And then I thought about, well, why would that be? And then I remembered that sudden changes in my childhood environment were usually a precursor to something unpredictable, to big threat. And then I had this thought that I'm always forgetting and remembering, and I offer it to you to think about when you are experiencing conflict or someone you love is experiencing conflict and behaving in a way that is like kind of funny or childish or childlike. I had this thought about, oh, right, it's my childhood self, which knew a lot about survival, emerging from the depths to protect me. And I think that sometimes when we reframe adult behavior in the context of conflict as it's their child self, which had to become an expert in survival a lot of the time, arising to protect the adult body, there's something about that that changes the way I orient to compassion and to empathy. And maybe that changes something for you, or maybe it doesn't. Um, but it's something to ponder. So that's interpersonal neurobiology. I mean, not all of it, but an introduction. Um, Hopefully you're seeing my slides now, or you will in a moment. While they appear, I will just also introduce the framework of conflict transformation. So, conflict transformation is a term that's often used almost interchangeably with the term conflict resolution or conflict management, popular in human resources, these terms. But it is distinct. Conflict transformation is an approach developed through the fields of alternative dispute resolution, peace and conflict studies, restorative justice, and transformative justice that seeks to understand, address, and ultimately change the conditions that lead to harmful conflicts. So it is about deeply understanding how conflicts occur and why, so that we can change those conditions. And unfortunately, um, up until now, about the past 10 or 15 years or so, which is pretty recent in human history, the fields of conflict transformation have not really included too much about trauma, brain science, the nervous system. Um, but as we've just noticed, there is so much about the body's internal experience, so much about the way that we develop on a neurological level or a neurobiological level that drives conflict. And so for me, if we really want to do conflict transformation, to build a better world, which is really what I'm in it for, it's kind of go big or go home over here, then we really need to be deeply understanding the embodied aspect of what's going on in conflict. Some questions to consider are, how does interpersonal conflict impact our bodies, which includes the brain? Sometimes we can do a little brain-body split in somatics, but I really mean when we say the body, we include the brain. And how do our body's instinctive survival strategies influence interpersonal conflict? How can we use the innate intelligence of our bodies as, ooh, that got cut off on the slide, but as a way to transform conflict? How can we use the innate intelligence of our bodies as a way to transform conflict? So, common approaches to conflict work tend to emphasize um, two main approaches. When you're learning mediation, when you're in a conflict resolution workshop at work or something, even in psychotherapy or mental health counseling, we tend to emphasize two main approaches that are not body oriented. They are cognitive approaches. So it's about understanding in the mind what's going on with a conflict. So we hear a lot about intention and impact so that we can reach a rational solution. Why did someone do what they did? and what is the impact of what they did. Um, that's a cognitive approach. And then we also tend to emphasize communication skills. So speaking and listening in a way that facilitates individuals to clarify misunderstandings, identify needs, reflect understanding, and negotiate respectfully. Some examples of that are the now culturally famous I statements. Has anyone here heard about I statements? You know, you say, I feel that when you, instead of saying, you always do that, right? This is very popularized by techniques like nonviolent communication through Marshall Rosenberg. Active listening, also very popular. So somebody says something in a conflict and you say, what I just heard you say is, and then you paraphrase what they're saying, right? These are really valuable approaches. I use them every day. So I don't mean to denigrate these approaches or say that they're not useful. However, I will add that I don't believe that cognitive approaches or communication focused approaches meaningfully address the impact of conflict on the human body. And the impact of conflict on the human body generally comprises an extremely intense experience of physiological stress, whether or not we are conscious of it. So many of us will be very conscious, as you were at the beginning of the session, of the physiological impact of conflict. And some people will say, no, I don't feel anything when a conflict happens, and that might be true. Or it might be that the physiological impact is subtler and happening more on an unconscious level. I would assert that the somatic crisis of conflict drives our experience of conflict and presents both limitations and opportunities for transformation, which is to say that I always feel in a conflict like my body is literally dying. Anyone else? Just me? Yeah, lots of people. It doesn't matter if it's a fight over the TV or if it's a fight over between me and my mother about who I should invite to my wedding, or a fight with my best friends about the recent results of an American presidential election. The impact of on the body is at least similar, if not the same. And that has a lot to do with, again, the traumatic impact of the situations that I grew up through in my early development. And that might be true for some of you as well. Maybe a lot of you. I would hazard to guess a lot of you. So we really want to be thinking about the somatic impact of conflict on the body. When we go really far in the direction of cognitive approaches or communication-based approaches, what that can end up doing is creating a really high premium, a big emphasis on staying calm. Has anyone ever been told or taught that before, that the key to conflict resolution is staying calm? Okay. And I will, I'll say sometimes it's really helpful to stay calm in a conflict, but I find it very hard to stay calm in a conflict. Anyone else? And what I did learn to do as a child and a teenager and in my early adulthood was the way I would stay calm as in conflict is I would notice all of these terrified reactions happening in my body, and then I would squeeze down on them with force of will, and then I would be very calm. Does anyone else do that? I still do that to this day. Whenever I look really calm, my husband says, I'm scared. You know? Has anyone ever noticed someone acting really calm in a conflict and felt kind of scared of them? Okay, okay. Has anyone ever noticed someone acting really calm in a conflict and gotten more triggered, but like gotten angry about how calm they are? Uh-huh. Have you ever tried to act really calm in a conflict and had someone get more angry at you because of it? Yeah, yeah. Um, so I'm pointing out some limitations. It's not that it's wrong to feel calm in a conflict, but if we are forcing kind of a physical armoring of calm over the somatic crisis of conflict, people tend to notice and they don't tend to like it. That's also why often if we're using I statements, like using some of the communication skills that are popular these days around conflict, but we're doing them in a way that is somatically incongruous, like Maybe saying like, I feel that when you bring new objects into the living room and you don't ask me first, then it really makes me feel unsafe. When we say it in a tone like that, it communicates something kind of frightening, or it communicates something that is incongruous with this with the intention, right? And so we really want to be with the body because it is in the body that I think it like an actually deeper understanding and a real interpersonal, neurobiological, neurochemical environment of deep communication can be formed. Like my partner knows that I'm angry, whether or not I'm acting calm. It feels a little bit dishonest if I am forcing kind of a calm exterior over it, and they know. Yeah. Um, so let's share in the chat. Um, what sensations or what symptoms, sorry, what symptoms do you notice in conflict in yourself? So what physical symptoms of conflict do you notice in yourself? Maybe there's nothing, but I'm just curious. What happens in your body when there's conflict? Yeah, energy that wants to go out, hot tightness in the neck, literal toe curling. Yeah, lots and lots. Urge to cry, shortness of breath. Thanks for these shares. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm gonna just take a moment to take those all in. Then let's just take a sacred pause. Hands over heart. Long breath in, longer breath out. I'm going to pause the chat in a moment. So let's just gently reorient to the screen. The chat is now paused. Yeah, a lot happens in the body. That's what I mean by the somatic crisis. It truly is um, the body going into a preparation for a very serious struggle. Common somatic symptoms of conflict include muscular tension, aches and pains, lockjaw, nausea, loss of appetite, um, disturbed sleep, so insomnia, nightmares, maybe oversleep as well, heart palpitations, heart stress, numbness, sleepiness, derealization, emotional shutdown, high reactivity, jumpiness, anxiety, and much, much more. I support people through conflict that happens over many days or many weeks, or in some cases, many months as well. And so these symptoms can become chronic, right? They add up over time. We want to be thinking about what supports the body to come back into a felt sense of more safety or more safeness, what allows us to drop into that space of being more okay. Um, I call this the window of transformation, which is an embodied conflict response model inspired by the very famous window of tolerance model created by Dr. Dan Siegel, as well as psychologist Pat Ogden, who is the developer of sensory motor psychotherapy, a really fabulous modality. Um, I refer to a window of transformation rather than a window of tolerance or window of capacity, because really we're orienting a nervous system based perspective to the specific context of conflict in this work. Yeah. And transformation for me is a little bit different than tolerance or capacity. What we're aiming for in a window of transformation is an embodied state. So we want to be able to get our own bodies to a place, to a state where we can hear and integrate feedback curiously and compassionately, but also with boundaries. Key to the window of transformation is feeling stretched or challenged, expanding the edge of emotional capacity. Often these days, when I hear people talk about the window of tolerance, particularly in the context of, say, something like trauma psychotherapy or doing maybe yoga therapy or body work, people will refer to coming into a window of tolerance, which is to say, lowering the level of arousal in the body. That makes sense to me. And conflict often calls for something a little bit different. It calls for us to be actively expanding our capacity um, so that we can meet the other person's nervous system in a highly interpersonal way. That doesn't mean we have to be going really fast, but it does call for this ongoing sense of being stretched. Or, as I like to say in mediation, if we don't feel stretched, it's probably not working. Um, then again, we don't want to be completely stretching so that we snap. Looking at the model here, we can track the nervous system or our level of nervous system activation through what I like to call conflict survival reflexes or conflict survival strategies. When we are stretched beyond our window of transformation, we will often enter maybe three-ish modes of conflict survival response. And the first is one that we're all really attuned to, I think, in the dominant culture, like we notice it, which is the destructive response, attacking attacking the relationship. We might call this the fight-flight response, overwhelm, panic, rage, a sense of it's them or me, and I choose me. The destructive response is destructive because it's about ending relationship. Um, it's not bad. The destructive response saves our lives in many cases. Sometimes we do really just need to end a relationship. So I don't want to stigmatize that. Again, we want to be with the wisdom of the body. Another type of embodied conflict survival response is the performative response. The performative response is often less noticed in the dominant culture. It's sometimes even rewarded in the dominant culture or encouraged. And I don't think that's so great because the performative response is about prioritizing maintaining relationship over integrity. This is where the nervous system is driving the body into what we might call a submission response or an appease response. Um, it's where we feel overwhelmed, insecure, and we're deceiving a self or other. We're giving in to get along. We can notice that the appease response is happening. I notice it a lot in mediation, actually, when we're kind of giving a little bit too much, or maybe a lot too much. We're giving in really quickly. The other person is always right. And when that happens, that often de-escalates the conflict quickly. In situations of interpersonal harm, many of us become highly trained in the performative response so that we can keep ourselves safe. This is another way in which embodied conflict survival reflex is saving our lives. But then we are often making agreements that we cannot keep in the performative response. In the performative response to conflict, we'll often feel very angry with ourselves or with others after the interaction is over. Has anyone ever noticed that? Where you were being really giving and really generous and forgiving, and then you resolved a conflict, and then the next day or the next week or the next year, you were suddenly full of rage? Some of you are raising your hands. Yeah. Maybe that's because some of the performative response was happening. Again, not a bad thing necessarily. It just means that our body was pushing us to get rid of that conflict interaction by performing a certain type of response so we could feel safe again. And then maybe we made some agreements we couldn't keep or some concessions we didn't believe in. The final conflict survival reflex I want to point out is a fragile or collapsed response. So this is where we collapse into shame and blame, feeling victimized or stuck or immobilized. You might call this a freeze response. This is where I often would see children in my work as a social worker put their head on a desk, or like curl up into a ball in a corner and really kind of absent of themselves. This is a collapsed response. And again, saving our lives often, a collapsed response is minimizing our interaction with somebody that we're in conflict with, which on some level means that we're minimizing the possibility that whatever behavior we're going to do will elicit a dangerous behavior from them. I just really want to honor the wisdom of our embodied conflict survival strategies. They're good in a lot of ways, but what they're not so good for is sustained relationship transformation through conflict. If we want to grow and transform through conflict, which as a married woman, I've learned that is really something we need to do if we intend to stay married for a period of time. We need to grow and change through conflicts. It's just true of any long-term loving relationship. We need the window of transformation for that. We need to be able to expand into the sensations of conflict while also having boundaries, which is no easy feat. And we can do it through practice. So here are some principles I'd like to offer you. Conflict, whether implicit or explicit, activates reflexive survival conflict strategies to some level of intensity in everyone. I really want to emphasize here that the different reflexive responses that are mapped in the window of transformation model are reflexive. It means we are doing them automatically, to some degree without choice. We can exert choice over them, but the default strategy is coming from us automatically. Individuals tend to default to whatever the body senses is the most survivable behavioral strategy, and whatever the body senses to be most survivable tends to have been shaped by the interpersonal neurochemical environment in which we developed. That is to say, our families of origin, our communities of origin, whatever environments we spent our significant time in growing up will really heavily shape our body's sensations inside of conflict and the automatic strategies that we tend to gravitate towards. So we could be really curious then about noticing our patterns in conflict, our unconscious embodied patterns, and wondering like, so what part of me from the past is coming forward to try to save my life? Survival reflexes most often carry implicit memory, as well as hidden wisdom that supports deeper conflict transformation. So that implicit memory, again, is what child part of me or what adolescent part of me, what young adult part of me, what part of me from that previous long-term relationship that wasn't so good is coming forward now through my body to try to protect me. And even if that protective response is not the one we want for long-term sustainable relationship, there might still be a wisdom there. I mean, at base, the wisdom is something in me doesn't feel fully safe right now. But another might be something about what we need, something about what we need for ourselves or from ourselves, something about what we need from the other person or people in conflict. So the invitation is to spend more time curiously with whatever is coming up through the body inside of conflict. Embodied conflict transformation calls for a balance of actively resourcing and containing embodied conflict survival strategies and blending with them in order to access deeper insights. So let's say that my default strategy in conflict, the thing my body almost always naturally wants to do first, is a performative response. A lot of mediators have this. You know, whenever a conflict comes up, I almost always automatically go into, are you doing okay? What do you need? And not, am I doing okay? What do I need? Right? Um, and there's a balance to be struck here. I want to notice that that performative response is coming up in me, and I want to contain it, actually, to some extent, because if I'm not containing it, my performative reflex will cause me to betray myself, usually in a serious conflict in some way. So I want to be containing it. I also want to be blending with it. I want to notice that my performative reflex, really practiced over time through a childhood and adolescence of serious relational danger, has given me some superpowers about understanding what other people need. Similarly, a destructive response, as someone's default, might have given them some superpowers about exiting relationships or setting hard boundaries, right? So we want to blend with the gifts of those survival strategies while also containing them enough so that they are matched to the situation that we are in and they have integrity with our intention for that relationship. If we're raising a child and they're doing something triggering and we're in a conflict with them, we want to contain our embodied response so that we are safe for them. We also want to notice what's coming up through us so that we can be really real and connected with ourselves. so that the relation itself becomes richer and deeper. I think sometimes in the world of polyvagal theory or nervous system theory, we can become very fearful of nervous system arousal. That is to say, sometimes we get a little allergic to this idea that the body becomes very activated in various situations, including conflict. Um, we tend to associate high arousal or low arousal with fight or flight, with a freeze response. And I don't think the window of tolerance was meant to be interpreted this way. I know it's not meant to be interpreted this way, but sometimes we can mistake this idea of a window of nervous system capacity for saying, oh, we need to get inside that window. We need to lower our body's level of activation so we're inside this window. I really, for conflict work especially, but for kind of any way of being with the body, I would really encourage us to instead notice that we can expand into high levels of arousal or into extremes of arousal and be experiencing them as delightful, as pleasurable, as helpful, as windows into the self. Um, because when we're able to do that, our range for interacting with life also increases. What do I mean by this? I mean, maybe this didn't make a lot of sense, but let me see if we can boil it down. Really, what I mean is embodied conflict transformation is really not about staying calm, but rather staying centered and connected to self, other, and spirit. Strong emotion and strong expression can be safe and are often essential not only to conflict, but to being human. So, very often, we kind of get trapped in binaries inside of conflict. Conflict activates the hindbrain, removes the prefrontal cortex from the picture, and we can start to think like, oh, I have to stay calm, I have to stay calm, I have to stay calm, or I have to express myself, I have to express myself, I have to express myself. And as I was preparing this presentation, actually just yesterday, I was scrolling on Instagram, like kind of procrastinating, and I saw a video about conflict. Someone who's making a video about conflict, where it was two characters in this video, and one character was saying, why are you always doing this in our relationship? I'm so tired of it. I don't know why I don't see any change. And the other character in the video said, your tone is making me feel unsafe. I can't have this conversation with you if you're having this tone. I am allowed to set my own boundaries. We're going to talk about this when you can have a different tone. And I felt kind of triggered by watching that video because I think it was instructing us to set boundaries in this way. It's not the way I really like to see boundaries set. And then I looked at the comments in the video, and there was this huge debate going on in the comments about which character was correct in the video. There was this, some people were saying, you know, you get to set your own boundaries. You don't want to hear loud voices. That's fine. And other people were saying, this is gaslighting and control. And I thought about this and I was like, right, it's kind of actually a little bit of both. There's wisdoms in both perspectives. There's wisdom in both points of view. Inside of conflict, generally, the body becomes very triggered. And I think this emphasis on calm, gentle tone, sweet prosody, open body language is about trying to create a sense of safety for people inside of conflict, particularly if we've had relational trauma happen to us. We want things to be calm. We want things to be gentle. Sometimes, not all of us, but a lot of us do. On the other hand, another aspect of interpersonal conflict and trauma is not being allowed to express our emotions, being given the embodied, felt sense that if other people are expressing strong emotion, raising their voice, gesturing quickly or largely, then that's automatically unsafe. And maybe if we are expressing strong emotion, if we are crying, if we are shutting down, if we are being big, if we're being angry, then we are unsafe for others. And really, the invitation that I want to make through this framework of embodied conflict transformation and attuned interpersonal neurobiology is that we get to both express strong emotion in a wide range of ways, and that we also get to be safe while we're doing that or while other people are doing that. Crucially, being in the window of transformation is about practice. Practice resourcing ourselves, practice connecting with others, practice knowing on a felt sense the difference between strong emotion that is being expressed in a way that is violent or dangerous and strong emotion that is being expressed in a safe way. And many of us did not experience in our families of origin, in the interpersonal neurochemical environments through which we developed, many of us never experienced conflict where strong emotion was being expressed in a safe way. Does that resonate for anyone? And here's what I'll say, again, coming from a child development background, is when I think about children and teens who have such strong emotions, I want them to know that their big emotions are really beautiful, whether they're angry, sad, happy, whatever. I also really want them to know that they have the ability to express them safely and to receive the emotions of others safely. We have a bigger, more open, more expressive world. And sometimes we need a timeout. Sometimes we need a moment to check in, a moment of sacred pause, a moment of calmness or centeredness, right? So that we can be with the big stuff. Those are all really complex skills. Um, and it takes practice and support to get there. So here are some strategies for embodied conflict transformation. The first is psychoeducation, so hand model of the brain, nervous system models, de-shaming reflexive survival strategies. Mostly we've done that today. Resourcing, practices that support and invite the body into the felt sense of safety, also called neuroception, through breathwork, orienting, somatic movement. We've done some of that already. And embodied conflict skill building, which is supporting individuals and groups to develop the somatic capacity and competencies needed to hold and integrate challenging sensations as a natural and potentially valuable part of conflict and relational rupture repair. That is, feeling and expressing powerful emotions safely, receiving and reflecting powerful emotions compassionately, setting boundaries, and making requests. And right brain communication, working with prosody, body language, and facial expressions to increase the skillful ability to communicate in a dynamic and emotionally resonant way. What does that mean, that last one, right brain communication? This is like a skill that some people find really intuitive and a skill that others find very difficult. I personally find it very difficult, but had a lot of practice. Um, this is about being with our bodies and our voices primarily in ways that actually resonate with other people with whom we are in conflict, which doesn't mean always being calm, right? When I'm having a conflict with somebody that I love, usually they want to see that I'm being affected, right? So when I'm in a conflict with my dear husband, sometimes it makes sense for me to cry. Sometimes it makes sense for me to have intensity in my voice. Like if they say, I bought this TV and I just wanted to make you happy, and now you're really upset, it might make sense for me to lean forward, touch them in an appropriate, safe way, and say, "Sweetie, I know you really care about me, and I did not like this TV." You know, it might make sense for us to be activated and show activation through the body. Um, the key is communicating right brain to right brain, which is to say the mammalian part of our brains that reacts not to language or responds not to language, but to symbol, gesture, feeling, tone. Um, to do that, we need to be able to be in touch with our own bodies and attuned to the bodies of others. That takes practice. Essentially, it is about being able to sense what's true for us and what's true for them on an emotional level and allow our bodies to express that. And that really comes with, again, the ability to meet difficult sensation without automatically categorizing it as dangerous. And that's not a thinking thing alone. We need that thought and able to conceptualize it, but we need embodied practice to really do it. And that involves slowing down to really notice our sensations, resource them, move, shake, stretch, laugh, dream, pause, all these many, many skills that you'll be learning, some of which you'll be learning today and the rest of the summit. I'm going to come back to this last piece, or the piece we did a moment ago, which is that embodied conflict transformation is not about staying calm. It's about staying centered. It's about embodying our deep truth. Because I would hazard to guess all of us, our deep truth is when we are in conflict, we first want to survive. And then secondly, we want to show up as our best self. And the practice of being centered in strong sensation and strong emotion allows us to do both at the same time. Survive and show up as our best self. And this is where I get a little bit spiritual. To me, true survival, survival of the soul or the spirit, is about ongoing movement, ongoing practice towards embodying the best self. That's my presentation. Thanks so much for being with me in it. I would love to take the last 5 minutes for Q&A. Not a lot of time, I know, I'm sorry. Lots of beautiful shares coming in through the chat. Thank you so much. Wow, I'm really touched. Thank you so much. Okay, so a question I'm seeing in the Q&A box is, this is so moving, thank you. How can I become aware of all this and better able to resolve conflict with someone who isn't aware? Yeah, well, a principle that I love is we don't really, I would say when we're having conflict with adults, like people who are our peers, it's usually not appropriate or helpful to try to teach them. And I just say that because I'm a mediator and I've tried to teach my husband and my friends conflict skills for so long, and boy, did it ever not work. It just got really mad at me, which makes sense, because when we are doing teaching, we're making ourselves superior in the dynamic. And so that just doesn't really tend to make people feel great, or that doesn't support their window of transformation, right? What supports people's window transformation is being in our own. And so if somebody is maybe not aware of conflict skills or conflict concepts, um, I think maybe one of the strongest ways of moving through that is to model, right? So if somebody is shutting down or lashing out, they're in a conflict survival strategy, something that we can model is just to say, wow, I can see that this conflict is or the situation, right? I can see this is really impacting you, and it's really impacting me too, because I care about you, right? That's modeling, noticing that something's happening for them and noticing that something happening for you, right? And then bringing care into it. We can also model just noticing our body. So I can say, I notice my heart is racing and my jaw is tight, right? And then I can say, and that I think that means I'm really impacted by this. It means I'm really struggling, and I want to be here with you. When we call attention to our own bodies, it calls attention to, it invites other people to bring their attention to theirs. Um, and we can just say things like, I don't know for sure, but I think you're really upset, and you're allowed to be upset with me. Right? This is inviting them to have a big emotion, and it carries the implicit understanding that you know that their big emotions can be safe and okay. And if their big emotion is coming at you in a way that does not feel safe or okay, what we can say is, I notice you're yelling at me a lot, or I notice you're raising your voice, and your anger is good, and you're allowed to raise your voice. And I also just need a minute. Or if you're okay to lower your voice, that would help me feel better. Right? So we're really modeling being aware of, validating, and also making boundary and request without stigmatizing. Um, Great question. Let's see. I'm gonna maybe try to answer one more. Uh, hmm. Curious not for self, but when in practice with clients, it is harder to know when the person is in danger versus needing to hold conflict more broadly. Some situations are more obvious. How can we ensure discernment? Well, this is a really important question, and it's very difficult for a practitioner to know when you're one-on-one with the client. So I mean, the first thing I would do in this situation is just invite the client to notice that their body is sensing danger, whether or not the danger is physically present. And if they're with you one-on-one, it's probably not physically present right in that moment. So it's a good opportunity to work with it. Then what we do is we support the client to resource themselves. So what helps the sensation to feel supported or to be supported? What is the sensation telling us? And once the client is sort of gets is feeling more confident about being able to meet their body's needs for the felt sense of supportedness in the moment, we can start to expand outward, right? So first, the client is learning to notice that the body is reacting with the danger sense. Then the client is learning to bring in supports for themselves, which then alters their experience of their own body. And once they have confidence doing that, we can start to ask questions about um, what is their intention for moving forward in relationships? The first is safety, right? And then the second is probably becoming a best self or better version of the self, which is about developing the skills to manage relationships in a different way. But we don't want to introduce this idea of expanding the self or managing relationships in a different way until we're really sure that the client has the ability to validate their own need for safety. Um, because if we are moving too fast, then the client is just going to feel gaslit by us, and that's not helpful. Um, it's different in mediation. Sometimes we actually do need to push a person faster because or in a family therapy also, we might need to push a person faster because our client is the whole system and not an individual person. And in this case, we can use the fact that we have other members of the system present to create a little more insight. So often, for example, in families where a parent's having arguments with an adolescent, which is very common, I might say to a parent in a family therapy session, so when you're angry or when you're in a conflict, I notice your body reacts and you raise your voice and you say some things that you don't always mean. If you look at your child, what is the impact you're seeing of the way your body is responding to them? How is their body responding to you? Right? And then I would validate your body's doing that because that's what feels most survivable to you. We might go into childhood or, family of origin as well. And what's your real intention here? You want to help yourself to feel safe so that your teenager can also feel safe. Same in couples therapy, right? You want to support yourself to feel safe so that your person can feel safe. And that's how we would invite discernment. This allows a person then to start to look for what are the cues that tell me I'm in real danger versus the cues that tell me I'm upset. Okay. Great questions. I wish I could answer more of them. But I want to respect our boundary of time and I'm already 4 minutes over. Wow. Thank you so much, everyone.